Bronze busts and bearded ladies. Mildred Peel's artistic legacy for Laura Secord. There was always something a bit strange about the 1905 portrait of Laura Secord, painted by Canadian artist Mildred Peel. The painting is a sombre yet dignified portrayal of an elderly Mrs. Secord dressed in a bonnet, coat, and lace gloves, similar to the dress she wore in the only known authentic photographic likeness of her, a daguerreotype from the 1860s. Ruth Mackenzie described the initial reception of the painting in her 1971 biography of Laura Secord. She said, "According to a contemporary account in the Christian Guardian, Miss Peel, availing herself of existing likenesses, also made a careful study of the faces of a number of living relatives and has succeeded in producing a portrait as faithful to the original as could now be had." However, despite this initial praise in the press, murmurings about the painting started soon after it was hung in the Hall of Fame in the Ontario Legislature, for which it had been commissioned. To any but the most casual onlooker, the portrait bore little or no resemblance to the authentic daguerreotype image of Laura Secord. The face had always seemed a bit masculine. And as the decades passed, it became even more so, as the faint outlines of a bushy beard slowly began to emerge through its angular contours. Rumours abounded that there was another likeness underneath. Eventually, the scuttlebutt and scandal about the portrait led to action. Art historian Frank Worrell carefully examined the work, taking a series of X-ray photographs. Sure enough, the X-rays revealed that a portrait of Sir George Ross, former Premier of Ontario, and the eventual husband of artist Mildred Peel, was painted under Laura Secord's stern gaze. The top and back of Laura Secord's old-fashioned bonnet were superimposed over George Ross's head, and the rest of Laura Secord's face was blended in over his nose, chin, and whiskers. Ross's forehead from the original portrait was actually incorporated into the final painting. The result, which was a bit disconcerting when first unveiled in 1905, became progressively even more odd-looking as it aged. The story which eventually emerged was that Mildred Peel had actually painted Sir George Ross's portrait a few years before, but either the Ontario Legislature declined to pass the expenditure for the requested fee of $500, or Sir George himself did not approve of the portrait. Whatever the case, it was refused. According to newspaper reports, George Ross's influence was such that he later succeeded in having the government purchase a painting of Laura Secord by his favoured protégée, Mildred Peel, evidently the very portrait which was painted over his own likeness. In a February 1936 report in the Chicago Sunday Tribune, former Ontario political reporter Victor Ross stated that a different artist had been called in to paint Laura Secord over the George Ross picture. "He painted off the Ross whiskers and put on a hood," he said. However, the painting still remains officially attributed to Mildred Peel, and there are good reasons to believe that this is indeed the case. Reflecting on the scandal, Secord biographer Ruth Mackenzie wrote, "In utilising the discarded canvas, Miss Peel followed a time-honoured practice of painters. It is an economical method, and if handled properly, the original painting detracts in no way from the painting that is superimposed on the canvas. Unfortunately, Miss Peel's painting failed the test." Laura's portrait was not a fake, though it was not a good likeness, but it caused so much amusement that Laura Secord herself became the butt of quips and jokes. Premier Mitchell Hepburn decided to leave the portrait hanging in the Ontario Legislature, but later it was taken down and relegated to storage. and there it stayed for many years, until it was eventually unpacked and put back on display in the Ontario Legislature once again. But we're not sure that the story ends there. In 2014, an exhibition of paintings and sculptures by the Peel family was put on at Museum London. In the exhibition, a small study of the portrait of Laura Secord was put on display. In the same exhibition, several portraits and sculptures of Mildred Peel's mother, Amelia Margaret Hall, were also on display. The resemblance of Amelia Margaret Hall to Mildred Peel's portrait of Laura Secord is quite striking. The expression, the features, even the pose of Mildred's mother are echoed quite faithfully in the Secord portrait. Mildred Peel and her brother Paul frequently painted and sculpted family members throughout their careers, so creating likenesses of their relatives came quite easily. Though just conjecture at this point, it seems plausible that Mildred Peel may have used her own late mother's likeness for the face of Laura Secord, perhaps as a somewhat cheeky way of memorializing her mother in the annals of Canadian history, or as a quick and expedient method of repurposing an existing portrait using a familiar face in order to collect the commission. In 1905, the daguerreotype of Laura Secord would not have been that widely distributed, so Laura's actual features would not necessarily be well known to the general public, which may have allowed the poor resemblance to pass unnoticed by naive observers. It is also just possible that Mildred had not seen the Secord daguerreotype, but this seems unlikely, given that the clothing and posture of the portrait closely resemble those in the old photograph. Also, a likeness closely resembling Laura Secord's face in the photo was available in the frontispiece of Emma Curry's 1900 biography of Laura Secord. Whiskers and controversies notwithstanding, Mildred Peel's artistic portrayals of Laura Secord in bronze and on canvas have helped immortalize a Canadian icon and have enriched our history with a couple of unforgettable stories.